"The 9th of frost month," I said, and my voice did not shake, because I have read aloud to frightened children for 11 years, and I know exactly how to keep a voice from shaking when the room needs it not to. 400 people. The whole council of Brackwater. And a king on a dais 11 feet from me, who had gone the colour of paper. "I have not slept properly since they put the crown on me," I read. "I keep expecting someone to come and tell me they have made an error and my brother is coming back." I did not look up. If I had looked up, I would not have been able to go on, and there were 9 more letters after that one, and every single one of them was going into the record of the territory. In his own words, because it was the only thing left in the world that could save 11,000 people, and because he could not spend it himself without it looking like a king protecting his own. So I spent it for him, without asking. 2 years earlier, I had signed my name to a crown scheme for writing letters to soldiers who had nobody, and had been matched with a man on the Eastern Line who signed himself Bron. My name is Selma, and I teach the children of Ondry, which is a town of about 600 people in the Vale of Kilda, 3 days east of Brackwater Keep. I was 8 and 20 that first autumn. Unmarried, no house behind my name, my mother 9 years dead, and my father gone to the coast with my brother's family, and I had the schoolroom, and about 40 children, and a life that suited me almost entirely. The scheme came through in the 2nd year of the Eastern Campaign. It was a crown thing, well meant and rather grand in its way. The war had gone on longer than anybody promised, and there were men on that line. Orphans, foundlings, the sons of houses that had disowned them, who received no letters at all, ever, while the post came in twice a month for everyone around them. So the Crown put out a call for correspondence. You gave your name to a clerk. The clerk matched you. It was anonymous. By design and by rule, you were not told his name, and he was not told yours, because the whole point was that neither of you should feel obliged, and because the Crown had no intention of arranging 400 marriages by accident. I put my name in because I was a schoolmistress with good handwriting and 40 children's worth of practice at talking to somebody who cannot talk back yet. The first letter I received was 11 lines long and said almost nothing at all. He had been matched, he said, and he was told he ought to write, and he did not have much to report, and he hoped I was well. It was signed with a designation, Eastern Line, 14th, and beneath it, in slightly better handwriting, as though he had thought about it and then done it quickly before he changed his mind. 1 word. Bron. I want to be honest about the first 6 months, because everybody assumes it was romantic from the beginning, and it was nothing of the kind. It was awkward. 2 strangers with nothing in common, writing every fortnight because a scheme said they should, running out of things to say by the 3rd letter, and grimly finding more anyway. What saved it was that we were both bad at lying. He could not do small talk. He tried it for 4 letters and gave up entirely, and in the 5th he simply wrote to me about a man in his company who had died of a thing that ought not to have killed anybody, and how he had written to the man's mother and had not known what to put, and could I possibly tell him what a person is supposed to say? And I wrote back 3 pages about my mother's funeral and what people had said to me that helped and what had made it worse, and I sent it and then lay awake half the night certain I had been appalling and overfamiliar. He wrote back in 9 days, instead of 14. That is how it started. Not with anything sweet. With 2 people finding out that the other one would answer a hard question seriously. 2 years. I want to give you the shape of it, because the shape is the thing that got taken later. We wrote every fortnight, and then every week, and then, in the 2nd year, whenever there was a courier, which was often. I told him about the schoolroom, and about a boy called Tam, who could not be made to sit down, and about the way the light comes into the Kilda Valley in October. He told me about the line, and the cold, and a horse he was fond of, and, increasingly as the months went, about his brother, who commanded the Eastern Campaign, who he plainly loved and plainly could not talk to, and about whom he wrote the way you write about a person when you have nobody to say their name to out loud. He never told me where he was from. I never told him where I was. That was the rule, and neither of us broke it. And I have thought since that the rule was the only reason it worked. We were not a soldier and a schoolmistress with lives that had to be made to fit. We were just two people and a pen. He signed Bron from the fifth letter onward. I signed Selma. 2 first names and no houses and no places, which is a thing you can only have with a stranger, and which we had for 2 years. His brother died in the 11th month. I knew it was bad before I read a word of it, because it came in a hand I did not recognize as his, shakier, cramped, and because it was 4 lines long after months of 4 pages. I wrote back the same day. I wrote him a great deal that I will not repeat here, because it is mine, and because a good deal of it was about my mother. And then he was gone for 6 weeks. And I understood, and I kept writing anyway into the silence, the way you do. And in the 7th week I got a letter that began, "Everything has changed and I cannot tell you how, and I am sorry, and please keep writing." I did keep writing. Of course I did. And the letters that came back after that were different, busier, more tired, full of a kind of pressure that had not been in them before, a man plainly buried in work he had not expected and could not describe. He apologized for it constantly. He said the shape of his duty had altered. He said there were things he was not permitted to put in a letter and that he hoped I would forgive that. I forgave it entirely, because I assumed I knew what it meant. I assumed he had been promoted into his brother's command, which is the ordinary and obvious thing that happens when a commander dies and his second is standing right there. That is the whole of my mistake, and I would make it again with the same information, and I have stopped apologizing for it. The quarantine came down on the Vale of Kilda in the spring. The campaign had ended by then, and the men were coming home, and a sickness came home with some of them. A real one. I am not going to pretend it was invented, because 11 people in Andry died of it in the first month, and I sat with 2 of them. The Crown put a cordon on the whole Eastern Valley. Nobody in, nobody out. No goods, no travel, no market. It was announced as 6 weeks. It was a hard 6 weeks, and nobody argued with it. That is the thing I want understood. We were not resentful. It was the correct decision, and it saved lives, and we sat inside it and waited. At 8 weeks we were told it would be reviewed. At 4 months we were told the review had been deferred. At 14 months, the Vale of Kilda was starving. Not dramatically. That is not how it happens. It happens slowly. In a valley that cannot sell its wool or its cheese, and cannot buy its grain, where the mill has no custom, and the smith has no iron, and 40 children in a schoolroom get quieter every term. It happens as an absence, of coin, of trade, of any way out, and it took 14 months to become the thing that was going to kill more of us than the sickness ever had. And the whole of that time, the letters came. That is the part I need you to hold on to. Everything else stopped. Every cart, every drover, every peddler, every scrap of ordinary traffic, in and out of that valley, stopped dead for 14 months. And twice a month, without fail, a Crown courier came through the cordon with a sealed sack. Because the correspondence scheme was Crown Post, and Crown Post is exempt, and in that sack there was a letter for me. We remarked on it constantly. It was the one thing in Andry that still worked. Old Marta at the mill used to say it was a mercy that somebody up there still remembered we existed. I have thought about that sentence a great deal since. The petition was my idea, and I am not proud of how long it took me to have it. 14 months, and it took a child. Tam, The boy who could not be made to sit down stopped being unable to sit down. That was all. He got quiet, and he got still, and he sat where I put him. And I stood in my own schoolroom, looking at a child being quiet, and understood that I had been waiting for permission from somebody for 14 months, and that no permission was coming. You cannot leave a cordon. But you can petition. There is a right of petition in Blackwater that predates every decree there is, and a petitioner may travel under Crown protection to be heard, and the cordon has no power to stop a lawful petitioner reaching the hall. I found it in a book of statutes older than my grandmother, because I am a schoolmistress and I owned 3 books, and one of them is that. I told him I was going. That is the detail that matters most, and I nearly left it out. I wrote to Bron the week before I walked out of the Kilda, a long letter, the longest I had written him in a year, and I told him a woman he had been writing to for 2 years was going to walk 3 days to a keep she had never seen, and stand in front of the King of Blackwater and ask him for the lives of 11,000 people. I did not say which keep. I did not say which valley. 2 years of a rule we had never once broken, and I did not break it that week either, which I have since decided was the single most expensive habit of my life. He wrote back that he was proud of me. He wrote that whoever this king was, he hoped the man had the sense to listen, and that if he did not, he was a fool. I carried that letter in the satchel with the other 40. I read it twice on the road, at night, at the side of the Western Track, because it was the closest thing I had to somebody walking with me. They let me out at the Western Post on a document, and a great deal of arguing. I walked to Blackwater in 3 days with a satchel, 41 letters from my correspondent in the bottom of it, because I could not make myself leave them in a house I might not come back to, and a petition on behalf of 11,000 people in my hand. And I stood in the great hall of Blackwater Keep on a full petition day, and waited my turn, and looked up at the wall behind the dais where the standing decrees of the territory are posted for any subject to read. The eastern cordon was 3rd from the left. I read it the way you read anything, and then I stopped reading the words and started looking at the letters, the actual letters, the shapes, because a woman who has read 41 letters from the same hand so many times that the ink has gone pale at the folds does not look at handwriting the way other people do. The K. It was the K first. He made a K with the leg kicked out too far. Always. Every time. In a way I had teased him about in the 9th month, and which he had told me he had been trying to correct since he was a boy. Then the whole of it came at once. The spacing. The way the downstrokes went heavy when the hand got tired at the end of a line. 41 letters in a satchel against my hip, and the same hand on the wall of the great hall of Blackwater, 6 feet high, signed with a seal. Something in me went very still and very clear. I did not faint, and I did not cry out. What I did was stand in a crowded hall doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic went like this. His brother died in the 11th month. Everything changed, and he could not tell me how. The shape of his duty altered. There were things he was not permitted to put in a letter. His brother had commanded the Eastern Campaign. His brother had also, I now understood, been the King of Blackwater, and Bron had not been promoted into a command at all. He had been promoted into a crown. And the decree on that wall, the one that had sealed 11,000 people into a valley for 14 months, was in his hand. I had told that man about the Vale of Kilda for 2 years. Not by name, never by name, that was the rule, but I had told him about the light in October, and the mill, and the schoolroom, and the 40 children, and I had told him, in the spring, that a sickness had come, and a cordon had come down, and that we were all being sensible about it. And then, I had told him it had not lifted. I had told him at 8 weeks, and at 4 months, and again in the winter. I had written it 3 times. He had never once answered that part, not in 14 months. I want to describe what I felt standing in that hall, because people expect it to have been heartbreak and it was not. Not first. It was fury. 2 years of the most honest thing in my life, and the man on the other end of it had read me describing my valley starving and had written back about a horse. I did not get to petition that day. I got as far as the steward's table, and then a clerk told me the day's list was closed, and I stood outside the keep in the dark with 41 letters in a satchel and nowhere to sleep, and I decided I was going to do something considerably less sensible than petitioning. I did not know yet why the only thing that ever crossed that cordon was the crown post, or what a man had been doing with the sack for 14 months. If you want to find out what 2 years of letters are actually worth to somebody who is not the person they were written to, and what it costs a woman to spend the most private thing she owns in front of 400 people to save a valley, stay with me. What I found out in Brackwater that week is the reason I am telling you any of this. I got in to see him by the least dignified means available, which was to give a letter to a guard, not a petition, one of his own. The 9th month, the one about the K, folded to the page where I had teased him about it, and I wrote on the outside, in my own hand, from your correspondent, she is in the yard. Hakon, his second, came out for me inside a quarter of an hour, and I have never seen a man look at a woman with such open and complete alarm. King Bron of Brackwater was standing when I came in, and he did not sit down for the whole of it. Selma, he said. Don't. I was going to tell you when. My voice was flat. You have had 14 months. You wrote to me about a horse in the 9th month of a quarantine you signed. So tell me when you were going to tell me, and then tell me why the Vale of Kilda is still sealed, and understand that I have walked 3 days and I am not leaving this room until you have. He went white, and I watched him do it, and the part of me that had read that man's handwriting for 2 years knew before he opened his mouth that whatever came next was going to be worse than a lie. The Vale of Kilda, he said slowly, was released in the summer, 8 weeks after the cordon. I signed the release myself. Here is what took us 4 days, and Hakon and 11 very frightened clerks to put together, and I will give it to you plainly because we were not plain about it at the time. We were both, for most of those 4 days, in a state I would not care to describe. The cordon was legitimate. Bron signed it, and he was right to sign it, and the 11 people who died in Andry in the first month are the reason nobody argued. He signed the release at 8 weeks, on the recommendation of the warden of the Eastern Line, exactly as he was supposed to. And then he was told the valley had requested an extension for its own safety, and he granted it. And then he was told the sickness had recurred, and he extended it again. And every one of those reports came up through the same office, because a cordon is administered by the warden of the line, and the warden of the Eastern Line was Lord Vale. 14 months of a king being told that a valley wanted to stay sealed, and 14 months of a valley being told that the Crown had deferred the review. Neither of us could check. That is the thing. Nobody could get in, and nobody could get out. And the only channel that crossed that line in either direction was the Crown Post, which is also administered by the Warden of the Eastern Line, because the courier route and the cordon are the same office and always have been. Lord Vale had held both ends of a rope for 14 months. Why? That is what I asked, in that room, on the second day, and the answer is so ordinary that I still find it difficult to say out loud without wanting to break something. Land writes the Kilda Valley has water and it has wool, and it has 11,000 people who had, by the 11th month, no coin, no market, and no lawful way to travel out and object to anything. Vale had spent that year buying mill rights, water rights, 4 of the great grazing commons, at prices that a district with no way to sell anything cannot refuse, every transaction lawful, every signature genuine, every seller a desperate man who signed because the alternative was worse. He did not steal a thing. He simply built a wall around 11,000 people and then made them offers and the letters. I did not work that part out. Bron did, on the third night, and he was so quiet when he said it that I made him repeat it twice. There were gaps. He had noticed them and never understood them, a 3-month silence in the 9th month when I had gone quiet, and he had written 4 times into nothing and assumed I had tired of him. And I had not gone quiet. I had written 3 letters in those months, and they were the 3 letters in which I had said, in the plainest language I have, that the cordon had not lifted, that we were hungry, that something was wrong. Those 3 never arrived. Every other letter I sent in 2 years did. He got the light in October. He got the boy who would not sit down. He got everything except the 3 pages where a woman inside a sealed valley told the King of Brackwater what was actually happening in it, and those had been pulled out of the sack by the office that carried the sack. Vale had not stopped the correspondence. That is the horror of it, and it is the cleverest thing in this whole account. He protected it, 2 years of Crown Post, through a sealed cordon, exempt and inviolable. Because a king who is quietly, contentedly writing to an anonymous woman every fortnight is a king who is calm and occupied, and not asking difficult questions about an eastern valley, and because the moment that correspondence became inconvenient, he did not need to end it. He only needed to read it, and take out the 3 pages that mattered, and let everything else through. The best thing in both our lives had been left running, because it kept us quiet. Vale moved the moment he learned I was in the keep, and he moved well. His first move was the petition itself. He did not oppose it, he had it verified. Very properly. A petitioner from a sealed district must establish residency, and residency is established by the district's own registry. And the district's registry had been sealed inside the cordon for 14 months, and could not be produced. And so the petition of Selma of Ondry was set aside pending documentation that it was not physically possible for me to obtain. Sorrowfully, with apologies. It would have held for months. His second move was the letters. He petitioned the council to have the correspondence seized. On excellent grounds, a private woman was in possession of 41 documents in the king's own hand, written in a period of national crisis, unexamined and unsecured, and the Crown had an obvious interest in them. He asked for them to be taken into the archive and sealed. He nearly got it. It was, in the room, an entirely reasonable request, and I watched half that council nod along, and I understood, sitting at the back with my satchel on my knees, that in about 2 days, the only proof in the world that a king had never been told his own valley was starving was going to be locked in the archive of the man who had done it. Bron could not stop it. That is the part he has never forgiven himself for, and which I have told him at least 100 times was not his fault. A king who intervenes personally to prevent the seizure of his own private letters, held by a woman he has been writing to for 2 years, is a king whose judgment the council will be examining by the following week. Every single thing he could do for me would have proved Vale's case for him. So I did it, on my own, without asking him, which is the only real quarrel we have ever had, and which we have had perhaps 4 times since. I stood up in the full council of Brackwater on the day of the seizure and asked, as is my right, to be heard on the disposal of my own property. They gave me 1/4 of an hour, because refusing would have looked ugly, and because I was a schoolmistress with a satchel and nobody in that room thought 1/4 of an hour was dangerous. And I read them the letters. Not all of them. 10. I had chosen them the night before at a table in an inn, and I had chosen them for one thing only, which was that each of them proved a date. And I had cried about the choosing for an hour and then stopped and done it properly, the way you do. I read the 9th of Frostmonth, in which the King of Brackwater told an anonymous stranger that he could not sleep, and kept expecting somebody to come and tell him his brother was coming back. I read the letter from the summer in which he mentioned, in passing, in a single line between a horse and the weather, that the eastern cordon would be coming off within the fortnight, written 11 months before I stood in that hall, by a man who plainly believed it was already done. I read my own letters too. My drafts, which I keep, because I am a schoolmistress and I draft. The 3 from the 9th month, I read them the pages that never arrived. We are hungry. It has not lifted. Something is wrong. And then I read them the letter he wrote me 4 weeks later, asking, gently, whether he had said something to offend me. 10 letters and 11 dates, and by the 6th one that hall had gone so quiet, I could hear the fire. I did not name Vale. I did not have to. I laid the dates out like a lesson, because laying things out in order until a room sees it for itself is my entire profession. And then I said the only sentence of my own that I had prepared, the crown post, is the only thing that crossed that cordon in 14 months, my lords. 3 of my letters did not. I would like somebody in this hall to explain to me which office lost exactly the 3 pages in which I told the King of Brackwater that his valley was starving. Vale did not answer, because there was no answer, and because a man who has spent 14 months being sorrowful and reasonable has no second gear when a room turns. He did not confess. There was, as ever, no single crime. A report is not a lie if you can argue about its sources. A purchase is not theft if the seller signed, and a lost letter is a lost letter. What finished him was the buying. 4 commons and a mill in 14 months, in a district he personally sealed, and once 400 people had heard the dates read aloud by a schoolmistress. There was not one house in that hall willing to be the one arguing that the coincidence was innocent. The accounting took a year. He was stripped and exiled inside the season. The cordon came off the Vale of Kilda 11 days after I read those letters. Bron rode into Andry himself with the grain carts, which I told him was theatrical, and which he did anyway. Now the cost, and I will not skip it, because it is the whole reason I still think about that day. I spent his privacy. 10 letters, in open council, in front of 400 people, and every one of them contained something a man wrote, believing that exactly one person in the world would ever read it. His brother. His sleeplessness, a 29-year-old who had never expected a crown saying so, in his own hand, to a stranger. It is in the record of the territory now. Permanently, any clerk may read it. Scholars have. A man wrote to me in the 2nd year of the campaign that he had never in his life been able to say a true thing out loud to anybody who knew who he was, and I took that letter and read it to 400 people who knew exactly who he was, and I did it without asking him. Because there was no time, and because asking him would have made it his choice and made it useless. He has told me, more times than I can count, that he would have chosen it. That is not the same as having chosen it. I know the difference, and so does he, and we have both decided to live in it. And the correspondence ended. That is the smaller loss, and it is the one that catches me at odd hours. There is no more anonymous soldier on the Eastern Line. There cannot be. Whatever we have now, and we have a great deal, it is not 2 people and a pen, and no places, and no houses. And that thing is gone, and it was the best thing I have ever had. And I ended it myself in a council chamber to save 11,000 people. I would do it again in an hour. It was still the best thing I have ever had. He asked me in the autumn, in Andry, in my own schoolroom, sitting on a bench built for a 9-year-old with his knees somewhere around his ears. He did it in writing. Of course he did. He put a folded page on the desk in front of me and stood up, and went and looked out of the window with his back to me while I read it, which I have since learned he had been practicing for a fortnight, and which he still cannot discuss without going red. It was not a grand letter. It was in the same hand as the other 41, with the K kicked out too far, and it was the plainest thing he has ever written to me, and the only line I will give you is the last one. Because the rest is mine, I have written to you as a soldier, and I have failed you as a king. And I would like, if you will have me, to spend the rest of it writing to you as neither. I kissed him first, in a schoolroom, over a bench built for a 9-year-old. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since the afternoon I looked up at a wall in Brackwater and recognised a K. 2 years on, I still teach. That was not a negotiation. Andre has 43 children in it now, and 1 schoolmistress, and there is a very fine argument about it, approximately twice a year, and I have won every one so far. The correspondence scheme still runs. It is bigger now, it goes to the border garrisons and the winter posts and the mining camps, and it is administered, on bronze order, by an office that has nothing whatsoever to do with any cordon, courier route or warden, and the sacks are sealed by the sender and opened by the receiver and touched by nobody in between. That was mine. I asked for exactly one thing after the council, and that was it. Tam sits down now. He is 11, and he can be made to sit down for nearly a quarter of an hour, which his mother regards as a miracle and which I regard as a defeat, and he has the second best hand in that schoolroom, and I have never told him whose hand I taught him to copy the loops from. And I have the 41 letters in a box, in Andre, in the schoolhouse, and not the keep, which was also mine, and which was not argued about. The ink has gone pale at the folds on most of them, because I read them so many times in a sealed valley over 14 months that I wore the words thin, which is a thing I did not know you could do to a letter until I had done it. I take them out perhaps twice a year. I do not read them all. I read the 5th one, usually the one about the man in his company who died. And what do you say to a mother? Because that is the one where 2 strangers found out that the other one would answer a hard question seriously, and everything else either of us has came out of that. I still wonder about the 3 letters, honestly, more than I wonder about Vale. Vale wanted 4 commons and a mill, and built a wall to get them, and there is no mystery in a man like that. But somebody in that office opened a sealed sack and read 3 pages of a woman telling the truth about a starving valley, and took those 3 out and let the rest go on, and had to do that 4 times, on 4 separate days, holding a letter in his hand and deciding. Tell me in the comments what you think a man says to himself on the 4th time. I have never been able to imagine it, and I have tried, and I would like to know whether anybody else can. Comment the 5th letter if you want to hear what Bronze Wolf did the first time it was brought into a schoolroom with 43 children in it who had been told, at length, that it was to be treated with dignity. And if you want more nights like this one, a king who was told his own valley was fine, a schoolmistress who wore the ink off 41 letters in a sealed veil, and 3 pages that never arrived, stay close. There is more of Brackwater left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.